Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visually Hidden Podcast. I'm Peter O'Brien, and joining me once again, always and forever, is Mr. Stephen Bendler.
What's going on?
And Mademoiselle Anne Milleville.
Bonjour, hi.
Last week, we talked a bit about holiday films, and I feel like we only really scratched the surface. I mean, of course, our main event was the VHS selection, It's a Wonderful Life. When people say holiday films or refer to holiday films, they're often referring to Christmas films. Let's just be honest about it. It's no great mystery. You can look at it any way you want, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think I'm the only person who watches The Long Good Friday on Good Friday.
I've never heard of that movie, so...
Me neither.
Oh, well, you'll hear about it. It's coming down the pipe, I promise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think you'll be disappointed.
All right, cool.
Nevertheless, we talked a bit about them, and we really only scratched the surface, I feel. And so I wanted to know, what were some of your favorite holiday films?
I would say The Grinch of, I think it was in 2018. The fact that you have someone who is pissed off about everything, and actually you still feel the magic of Christmas in this movie. I don't know. I love this movie so much. And Corpse Bride also. It's one of my favorite Christmas movie, and it's a Tim Burton movie, so everybody loves Tim Burton, right? So.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm always kind of fascinated when people talk about their favorite films, and it's usually a more contemporary film. You know, when I think of a favorite film, I think of something that's like been with me for like a long time, like decades, that like has like weathered the storm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like I can still go back to it and find comfort or enjoyment or enlightenment. I'm always amazed by people's selections of newer films, because I know, Stephen, I know your favorite film is Back to the Future.
Always.
And will be until the day you close your eyes.
That's right.
My favorite film, as I said in the VHS series, is It's a Wonderful Life, but I didn't watch it until I was in my 20s. My other favorite film is probably Star Wars, and I count the entire original trilogy as one story. And then today's VHS selection is probably right up there with my favorite films of all time, which is why it made the early cut on the series. We'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, I completely forget that Corpse Bride is a holiday film.
Yeah, I don't even think it was a holiday film. That's interesting.
Ah, okay. For me it is, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Yeah.
It was the theme of my wedding, and I don't think of it as a holiday film, you know, so it's interesting.
Stephen, give us like two or three of your favorite holiday Christmas movies.
I'll give you a quick synopsis of my season. All-time favorite Christmas movie is definitely National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Watch it every year, probably multiple times in that season. Home Alone 1 and 2 get watched in my house all the time. I have a personal tradition on Christmas Eve. When everyone goes to bed, I watch Trapped in Paradise, Four Christmases, and Fred Claus. That's what I do into the wee hours of the morning. I watch those three movies back to back to back.
Last week, we talked a little bit about how good holiday movies or good Christmas movies can be universal, and they don't necessarily have to be specific to the holiday or the holiday season. I find myself watching a lot of these Christmas movies year round. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not specific to December. There are some movies that I will kind of starve myself for. So like I want to watch it, but I don't watch it until it gets to around this time of year, because I don't want to lose my taste for it.
Yeah.
One of those, of course, is A Christmas Story. I will usually watch that year round, but then there'll be times where it's like, nope, I'm going to save this one for later. Yeah, It's a Wonderful Life. Honestly, that movie I can't watch all the time just because of how it affects me. You know, I don't want to go through that emotional turmoil all the time. I did find this one movie a couple years ago. It's called The Man Who Invented Christmas, and it's about Charles Dickens when he wrote A Christmas Carol. And it's actually a really good film. It's really interesting, and I think you guys might appreciate it as well from just a writing point of view, because again, it's about Charles Dickens and his process of writing the story. And he wrote this story, this like classic timeless story that has been around for like ever. Like it was published in 1843. It just kind of shows you his process. And while I was watching it, I was like, wow, this is like the most accurate representation of the process of writing and like discovering characters and like living with them and working with them and like getting to know them. Like they show quite a few scenes of him just in his office having conversations with Ebenezer Scrooge, who's played by Christopher Plummer.
Oh, that's cool.
And just trying to like figure out like, how do I unlock this character? And so he's having actual conversations with his characters and like living through his moments. And it was really a pretty interesting and entertaining film. So The Man Who Invented Christmas, I highly recommend that one.
All right. I've heard of it.
And it's a little bit different because when you think of a Christmas movie, you think of what we are all familiar with, which is lights and trees and presents. And now it's ugly sweaters and music and things like that. And like back in the 19th century, that wasn't really the case. Like A Christmas Carol is partially the reason that we celebrate Christmas the way we do. And a lot of the ideas and themes that are present in that are tied into what we take forward. So, and that's why it's called The Man Who Invented Christmas, because prior to this, Christmas was sort of just another day of the year.
Yeah.
And then it became this moment in time where it's like, no, you should think about other people and you should like take at least one day out of the year to think about others.
I'll have to add it to the list.
Seems great.
In the 1960s, when How the Grinch Stole Christmas came out, it's like, well, why is this monster like stealing Christmas? But then like over time and experience and decades, it just gets one-upped to a point where now Santa Claus is wielding an axe. You know, there's something to be said about violence, you know, and especially at Christmas time. You know, you wouldn't think of those two going together, and yet sometimes they go together like peanut butter and jelly, and it's just like, wow, that was something different, and I think I liked it. Yeah. Horror holiday. I'm curious. Violence under the mistletoe. What do you guys think?
I remember vividly as a child, the cable guy was hooking up Cablevision, and the first thing I saw when the cable was finally hooked up, Tales from the Crypt, the killer Santa with the axe. I was like, this is amazing. And then I think that was that was it. That was like the beginning of the end.
That was one of the first episodes of Tales from the Crypt. It was like, I think that was like the first night it premiered, they showed 3 episodes, and that was one of them. And it's a carryover from the original film version of Tales from the Crypt from 1972. It's a classic.
Yeah, I thought it was terrifying, but I couldn't look away. So it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious about it. So.
You know, we're talking about Christmas and peace on earth and goodwill towards men, but then in the same breath, in the same conversation, we're talking about axe wielding psychotic Santas and monsters stealing shit. And I think Christmas acting as a backdrop heightens the violence because like, you can't do that on Christmas.
Right.
You know, so what is your guys' take on the allure of violence?
By and large, the harsh critics forget that movies are just really a form of entertainment for the most part. I mean, they could do other things, they could function as other things, but there's a vicariousness that you live through some violent things. Not all movies. I'm not saying people want to go out and murder people, but something like John Wick, like a revenge story. You know, I mean, people can live out those impulses safely by watching someone else do it, and then once that's out of your system, you can go back to food shopping and cook dinner. I think, but it's the escapism, getting to experience all the dangers of these acts without having to actually commit them.
Yeah. I think violence shows our limits, especially as a viewer. It shows you what you're able to see, and especially for Christmas, as you said, I think the emotions are at their climax during Christmas, especially when you're with your family. And I think a Christmas movie where the family is fighting for real, it's interesting for everybody because you relate to it. Even if you think Christmas is love, is sharing good moments, it's interesting to have those two opposites in one movie and see how it goes.
With Christmas, I agree that having violence in a Christmas movie is a very strong juxtaposition and it is intriguing. But what about violence outside of the holidays when it's not being used in a entertaining way? Do you guys find violence entertaining outside of commentary?
I don't like horror movies, but I'm not gonna say I like violence. But there are movies that I like with violence in it. It's for me, it's two different things. For example, one of my favorite movies is Fight Club. It could be considered as a violent movie. For me, it's not really a violent movie. It's more than the violence. Violence is just a way to explain something, you know, and that's what I like in so-called violent movies. They use the violence to shock you, to make you wonder about something. I feel that way. So it's just a way to show you something else. It's not just to see a fight and to see blood. It's more than that. So yeah, I think when you use violence, for example, there is another movie I like. I don't know if you heard about it. It's a Japanese movie. It's called Battle Royale.
Yeah, Battle Royale. It's awesome.
It's awesome. Yeah.
It's like a precursor to the Hunger Games.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I think it's really interesting to see. You see human nature, as you said, Steve, previously. So you're gonna see all of them trying to kill their friends, their schoolmates, just because they want to survive. So I think it's so interesting to see what you're willing to do to save your life. And you know that's what is about violent movies for me. It's not just to show blood, is to show who you really are.
I've never believed that violent movies or violent games or whatever um, creates or it gives people the idea to be violent. People have the inclination to be violent or they don't, and I just think that the arts area is a nice scapegoat. A nice, well, I did it because of this. No, you didn't. You did it because you're a lunatic, and you know you have no impulse control, and this is just a nice nice reason to hang your hat on. But people get so excited to see the good guys beat the bad guys, to see the bad guy get what's coming to him. It's a way to live vicariously through those characters. I think it's natural, I think it's healthy, and I think people who say it's not, I think you're kind of lying to yourself.
You also can't deny the fact that violence exists in the world, and to have it in films is lending an authenticity in a lot of cases or legitimacy in a lot of cases. You know, you can't not have it and explore certain stories. I mean, can you imagine Saving Private Ryan without violence?
Right.
You can't tell that kind of story. It just doesn't work. And, you know, the violence in that film is historical. And for the most part, it's historically accurate. I mean, when they do a movie like that, there's a lot of research that goes into it and they consult a lot of people. And in some cases, they have witnesses. The film Goodfellas is another example of actual violence. That movie is based a lot on testimony. And so you can argue that, oh, well, that's extreme violence, but that's the story that we're telling. And if you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. But it doesn't change the fact that these things exist in our world and these personalities exist within our world. There's these degrees of violence that I think sometimes people can't fathom or would rather not experience. And so when they hear, oh, well, this film is great, it's acclaimed, it's nominated for Best Picture. Taxi Driver was nominated for Best Picture of the Year. It didn't win, but it was nominated. And that movie has a lot of very extreme and graphic violence, you know, and I'm not trying to say that, oh, well, it has to be there, but it's a part of the story that they're telling. And I agree with Steve that, you know, anybody who's watching a movie and then decides to go recreate what they saw, they clearly have some type of psychological issue that is motivating them. It is not the movie that is motivating them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just gives some ideas, you know.
There's that as well.
What it would take for you to, not you, but anyone to kill another person. You don't just get there after watching something for an hour and a half. Like you have to, that has to be in you already.
Although, on the other hand, people have watched Indiana Jones and decided to become an archaeologist, so maybe the point is moot.
Actually, when you are interested into violent movies, it's because you're not a psychopath. Maybe that's the thing. That's something you're not gonna do. So it's like a fantasy movie in a way. It's something that maybe you dreamt of, but you know you're never gonna do it. So you want to kill, I don't know, your manager or your neighbor, but you'll never be able to do it. So to see that someone is doing it or singing it in a song, you feel like, okay, it's not you, but you feel like justice has been done for you some way, you know. So you feel better
I
because someone could do it even if you can't do it yourself.
There's definitely degrees of violence throughout film and cinema history. And our VHS selection this week was A Clockwork Orange, which is notorious for being considered ultra violent. They actually use that term in the film to describe the type of violence that the characters are partaking in. And the term ultra violence, I mean, it's since gone on to be adapted into this like basically idea of exactly what it says. Ultraviolent is extreme violence and it is depicted in a graphic way. And now this movie is from 1971. There were not a whole lot of ultra violent movies at the time. This was really kind of a groundbreaking film in that regard as to what was being shown on screen. And this was a Warner Brothers film. Like this was a major studio film. It wasn't an independent film where you can kind of get away with whatever you want and do whatever you want. For me, it's been one of my favorites for a long time. I remember the first time watching it on VHS when I was in 8th grade, junior high, and it wasn't even so much the violence because at that point I had already seen a number of violent films. I had seen all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, which, you know, if you've seen part one, it doesn't really get much better than that as far
yeah.
as ultra violence goes. You know, I wasn't necessarily affected or attracted to or by the violence so much as the story, as the character's journey, and then even the filmmaking techniques and the photography in this film, especially the way it was told and then the way it was all put together and the way it was utilized with the music, the juxtaposition of this like beautiful classical music with this extreme violence and sexual content. It's just a very rich piece of cinema. And so that was the reason that I selected it for VHS. But again, I can't recommend it to everybody because, of course, people have actually suffered these traumas in real life. And I would hate for somebody to be like, oh, yeah, Clockwork Orange. I've heard that's a good movie. This guy Pete said it's awesome. I'm going to go watch it. And then they start having flashbacks to some trauma they've experienced. And so it's definitely observe with caution. But if you're up to it, I don't think it's a disappointing adventure. Let's dig into A Clockwork Orange. Let's see what makes A Clockwork Orange tick.
Yeah, so I watched it for the first time quite recently, last week, and I had the chance to watch it on a big screen. I think this movie was a very artistic one and cerebral one, and not an ultra-violent movie. I didn't feel that way, but I understand what you mean, especially when someone has been a victim of those kind of things. It must be difficult to watch. But for me, it's not an ultra-violent movie. When you watch, I don't know, a TV show like Game of Thrones, for example, you have more violent scenes in Game of Thrones than in Clockwork Orange. I feel that way. But I was really curious to watch this movie because I knew the impact this movie had when it came out. Because we even have an expression, maybe you have it in the United States, but we have an expression in France when something super violent happens. We say it's the French Clockwork Orange. So I knew about this movie, the title and everything, but I didn't watch the movie at that time. So I was really curious to have my own opinion about it. The most unbearable scenes for me were actually the brainwashing moments, you know, with the torture, with the clips around the eyes. That's the only moment I couldn't watch the screen. But otherwise, I think it's very clever. It's and artistic, as I said, as you said, the music and everything. You don't notice the time when you watch this movie, and yeah, a real great experience.
It's just a masterpiece. And it's one of those movies that, like, I know it's great, and it sits on my shelf, and then, like, I hadn't seen it in about 5 years, and I just forgot how great it is. So watching it again the other night, I was like, "Damn, this is an awesome movie." The last time I saw it was on the big screen at the Alamo Drafthouse. They were celebrating Kubrick, so I had to go see that. And seeing it on the big screen is a great experience. You have to power through some uncomfortable shit to get the reward at the end of the journey. I mean, this movie style for days. I mean, the shots are beautiful. The choices are brilliant. The music is fantastic. Malcolm McDowell's performance is off the charts. Everything was working and firing on all cylinders. And then if you look at it now, the slow motion shot of them walking past the waterway, that's been copied from everything from Reservoir Dogs up till Guardians of the Galaxy, the slow motion walking of a team, right? I mean, that shot where they're in the car speeding away down the road, high on the milk, Kill Bill, the legacy that this movie is leaving and still leaving. We're talking about 52, almost 53 years removed from the release of this movie, and it's not slowing down. I mean, beautiful use of narration in this movie. Just the fact that someone could do such horrific things and then you still can turn it and make the audience feel for him at certain points of the story. That is a feat in itself. This is one movie where I would wholeheartedly say watch it again and again. You can get so much from this film.
I would say this movie is in two parts. You have the first part with basic violence, and maybe that's the hardest part to watch for most people. And I feel like people stopped at this part when they talk about it. When they say it's a ultra violent movie, they just think about the beginning with the fights and the rapes and yeah. So this part you have to watch it to understand the context and everything, and to get fascinated by the protagonist, because that's the thing. This guy is fascinating, is enigmatic. Even his look has something crazy with the eyelashes on just one part of his face, and the fact that he has a snake as a pet. I love that. I'm an overthinker, and for me, the fact that he has a snake says so much about him. Because for me, a snake, it's power, it's sexuality, it's transformation. And with a snake, you have, with the venom, you can be killed by it, but you can be healed by it also. So I don't know if you have that in America, but we have cosmetics with snake venom. So I don't know. I think it was fascinating to get in contact with this guy. Just at the beginning of the movie, you need to understand that. You need to have this context to understand the second part. And the second part is the core of this movie. It's about psychological violence, about morality, about state violence also, political violence. I don't know how you call that, but and yeah, this movie I will recommend it for sure. But I can understand that it's not for everybody, but you should see it at least at once, just to understand the purpose, because even if it was made in the 70s, it's still very topical nowadays. So yeah, very interesting movie, but I'm not sure I'm gonna revisit it.
It's definitely my favorite
Yeah.
of his catalog. It is like I said, it's one of my top favorite films of all time. And like I said, I've studied it. So yeah, I remember I was teaching at an international language school in New York, and I was teaching a number of different film classes there. And I showed Clockwork Orange to one of my classes. And these were all college age students for the most part, from around the world. And I actually got called into my boss's office for showing A Clockwork Orange to one of my film classes. And I think he wanted me to apologize or like express some kind of like remorse for like my actions. And I just remember it was like this like awkward situation where I'm looking at him and he's looking at me like waiting for me to say sorry. And I'm just looking at him like, are we done?
Yeah.
Like, what do you want?
Yeah.
Part of the reason I showed it was the demonstration of language, because again, it was an international language school. But the other side of it too was being able to discuss these things and for them to be able to express their feelings in a clear, coherent, and safe way. because now, okay, we're confronting violence, but it's in a classroom where we can actually dissect it and explore it and understand it. So, and it was not without warning. I mean, I let people know ahead of time, just as I did in the VHS video, like there's some stuff in here you may not want to see. So if you've ever had any of these kinds of experience or triggers in your life, feel free to leave and we can talk about it later.
Yeah. There's so many instances in this film, if you hit pause, it's an iconic image. I mean, just the profile of him when he's yelling at the hobo in the beginning. That's extremely tight close up, but the way it's lit, that you see the silhouette of his face and still see his full face. I mean, you can't ask for a better shot. Them walking down along the water, them in the car, just them in the milk bar sitting there. I mean, there's so many instances where it's like iconic, 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 iconic. And then, of course, probably the most is with him with the eye clips. I mean, that's seen everywhere, that's referenced all the time. But so many people have said it's probably one of the closest adaptations from book to film that exists, not just in the adaptations Kubrick has done himself, but just overall. Because I heard it's a notoriously hard read at first because of the language created for the characters and for that world. It's a little tough to follow.
Yeah, I mentioned that a little bit in the VHS video as well. I have actually read the book, and at first, and it's like a fleeting hurdle when you're reading it. You kind of adapt to it a lot quicker than you would think, especially if you have seen the film. And by the point when I read the book, I had seen the film a number of times, so I was very familiar with the terms that they use throughout the story. But as I mentioned in the VHS video, the film omits the final chapter. Stanley Kubrick, he had the US printing that omitted the final chapter when it was originally published. It just stops where basically the movie stops, where he has kind of reversed the effects of the treatment. And in the book, there's another chapter where he does kind of revert to his old ways, not to the extremeness, but he also then he's rolling with a different crew of droogs, and he runs into one of his former droogs, Pete, who is kind of the quiet one, not Georgie or Dim, but Pete, the quiet one. He runs into him and he kind of realizes like Pete's doing all right. Maybe I could do all right too. And he takes the actual initiative towards growing up and becoming responsible and kind of losing not his lust for life, but his lust for that life. In my copy, there's an introduction by Anthony Burgess where he talks about it, and he talks about having written it, and it's 21 chapters, and 21 being symbolistic of the age of maturity. And so it was intentional on his part, and he was actually kind of very, very angry with the publisher for dropping that final chapter because it presented an incomplete story in his mind.
Either way, I think it's interesting. And also I think it kind of works better for the film as it is. You have that horrific sci-fi feel of like the government meddling and like they don't want to be held responsible, so they're just gonna put you back the way you were, and we say we helped you. And then that to me kind of really is one of the more sinister things in the movie. I mean, kind of above anything else that Alex has done.
About his friends who became policemen, I think it's really interesting also to see that those guys who followed him, so maybe they were not as a psychopath as he was, but they did bad stuff too, and they became policemen. So you feel when you see them as policemen, you feel, okay, this guy now took the right path in life, but actually they did not, because they tried to kill him. So it's interesting to question the costume,
You're right. And it's also interesting to note, like, yes, they did become policemen. They became part of the government. Yeah. They became part of the system. They became part of like that trickle down effect where it's like, okay, yeah, it starts at the top with the guy who is he, the governor? The guy who like recruits him for the procedure. Yes, you'll do nicely. Blah, 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 blah. Like it starts with that guy, and then it goes down through the doctors, and then through the security guy, through the jail officer, through the policeman, down into the community. And so his friends didn't really change because they became policemen, as you said. They got a new costume for their evening's adventures.
The author, Mr. Alexander, says something on the phone to his friends about that. How the government is either throwing these kids into this procedure or making them part of the police force. And when they do that zoom in on Alex's medicine, it says number 114. So are we to think that Alex is the 114th patient that they've tried this on? And then Alex seems to be the one that's working.
I have many questions, and I think maybe you can have the answers when you have read the book. I don't know, but for example, all what I call the first part, the way they talk. Do we have an explanation about this weird vocabulary in the book? And second of all, something that I loved in the movie, and I would like to know if it's the same thing in the book, because I would be a bit disappointed if it's not the same thing. Do we know why he's like that? Why Alex has this weird attitude, this weird behavior? Because that's something I loved in the movie, and that's probably the the thing that fascinated me the most. It's you don't have any reason for this guy to be like that, because you met his family. It seems to live in a loving family, and as I understood, he goes to class, so he's kind of educated, So I don't understand why he's acting like that. And in most movies, when you have such a guy in the movie, they explain you that something happened when he was a kid, or when he was a teenager, or his father or his uncle was really mean with him, or there's always something to explain this attitude. And that's something I loved in the movie, is that there is no reason. So it's just his nature, and you have to cope with that. Some people are like that.
One of the things that does get lost in translation between the film and the book, they don't specifically explain the answers to the questions you've asked, but you have to read into it a little bit. And so with regard to the language, the slang that they use is something that the author invented. It's called nadsat. You can look it up online. There's a glossary for all these terms, and it's a combination of Russian slang and English slang, and it's brought together. That comes about because, again, this is a science fiction book. It is set in the future from when it was written. And so the idea behind that is now, okay, Russian culture and English culture have come together in some sort of maybe war that has happened, because the story is set in a sort of dystopian future. And you get that from the bleakness, from the architecture, from even just the way the characters are acting. I mean, you remember when he's walking home and it's like he's walking through a demilitarized zone. There's all the garbage and rubbish all over as he's walking in, and the elevator in his building is busted and there's graffiti. It's like the landscape has been overrun with these youthful gangs, such as Billy Goat, Billy Boy in Poison. Okay. The idea is that something has happened. Society is crumbling. The youth are banding together and rebelling in their own ways. And part of that is just the natural progression of language. I mean, you think about like, okay, yeah, go talk to a 17-year-old right now. Just go outside your apartment, find a 17-year-old and go talk to them and see how much you understand about what they're saying.
Yeah.
It's that level of youth is always developing its own language. And so Anthony Burgess kind of saw this and just applied it to his story. The other element that you mentioned about why is he this way? Well, in the book, the character is about 15 years old. In the movie, they make him about 19 years old. And there's a pretty big difference between a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old. And he's played by Malcom McDowell, who's like in his 20s at this point. So he looks a lot more mature than the character was conceived to be. As a result, again, there's like this rebellious youth aspect to it. Like, why do teenagers do certain things?
Yeah.
Why do teenagers do stupid things? I know I did stupid things. I know a lot of people who have done stupid things when they were kids, and part of it is like you're developing and you have all these hormones, and so that's why, like, in this broken down dystopian society, he and his friends just go out and act out their impulses. There is no real authoritative presence, and if there is one, then they are rebelling against it. So, and it's only when it gets to an extreme, which is murder, that it's then put into check.
When you look at his parents have no idea what he does at night. Oh, he does odd jobs to make money. Okay. He's out there raping and pillaging people, and then the guidance counselor, just sits with him, and which for me is the weirdest part of the movie. That guy, always with the weird, like, hello, little Alex. Yes, skipping school. Yes, it's very strange, that guy. But even him, he's like brushes him off, like, what? Who cares about what you think, pal? Just leaves the room. Clearly, Alex doesn't give a shit about what the authorities in his life have to say until he gets locked up.
About the fact that Alex is a big fan of Beethoven, for me it shows that this guy who seems really antipathic, really unhuman with his behavior, he has a little piece of humanity somewhere. And the fact, and I think it was really heartbreaking when you see the scene, the brainwashing scene with the music, and he begs for them to stop because that's his music. He's losing his humanity at this moment. I don't know if he thinks about that, but for me, it was the very most touching moment in the movie, and also about the sympathy we can have for him when he meets the homeless guy just after he came out of the healing process. He meets the homeless guy he beat up at the beginning of the movie. I don't know, I felt so bad for him. When I saw the homeless guy, I said, oh my God, no, please, go away. Well, actually, he had right to get revenge from this guy. I don't know, I felt bad for him. So, there are so many moments you have sympathy for this guy that you thought you will never have sympathy for. But I think it's the fact that he fascinated you from the beginning.
His affection for Beethoven, especially, like that is his heart. That is basically sacrificed. That is his soul that the government takes away from him. That is his humanity that it really robs him of. Because again, he is a rebellious youth in this extreme society that he's living in. And who's to say that his generation would not grow out of it? Clearly, he's not the only one if his gang is fighting with other gangs. Like it's not just him that's doing it. And even the girls that he picks up at the record shop, I mean, of course, in the book, they are much younger, but even the girls that he picks up at the record shop, like they go back to his house voluntarily. Yeah. It's not like he's chloroform ragging them and dragging them into his rape den. Yeah. He's a suave young man who's picking these ladies up, and they want to be there too because they're a part of that who gives a fuck youth.
Maybe he has become that way because of all these other gangs. It's you kind of, you do it to survive, and then after a while you become desensitized to what you're doing, and then it goes overboard, which clearly it does in this case, and he gets hauled away.
I wanted to know if I'm a psychopath or not, but with the scene with the cat woman, I call her like that, the woman with the cats. I don't know, but I was laughing all along. And I was the only one in the room laughing in this scene. Even if she get killed at the end, I think everything is funny. Even the way she got killed. I don't know. Am I a psychopath?
No, it was funny.
Oh, okay, you're right.
No, because Kubrick, McDowell said Kubrick hired her to play the role because she was a bit tough. So when she's like, "Get the hell out of here! I'll break your face," or whatever the threats that she throws out, he wanted the audience to think that she might be able to kick Alex's ass if he didn't have a weapon. So because if it was just a little old lady sitting in a chair and he hit her in the head with a statue, that's just flat out despicable. But this woman is like, they're having a back and forth, and he's fucking with her. And I honestly don't think he meant to kill her. He wanted to hit her and maybe knock her out so he could rob her or whatever. But I don't think the intention was never to kill her, because then he doesn't find out later on until after the fact that the author's wife also dies. So he kills two people, but I don't think he intended to.
They kind of perceived it while they were filming it as sort of a dark comedy. There's a lot of satire in the film, but it takes it to such an extreme that audiences who were not in on it could really pick up on. And it's only now, and it's specifically in that cat lady scene. I mean, if you watch Kubrick's previous films. Okay, the one before this was 2001: Space Odyssey, but if you watch the movie before that, Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, that is a complete satire of very serious business, but there are these just like bizarre characters that come into that story and like heighten it in a way that it is goofy, but it's also serious business. And I think a lot of Clockwork Orange is built out of that idea and that approach to telling the story, where it is in a satire, but it is so extreme, especially with the events that come before it with the home invasion, that it kind of it gets lost in the translation. And in a lot of ways it's ahead of its time, because now we've seen so much as a culture and as a civilization, especially through the cinematic lens and presentation, that not that we've been desensitized to it, but our palate has been accustomed to it. And so now we can look at a movie like Clockwork Orange, and yes, if you're coming at it from a background of trauma, you're going to see something different than somebody who is going in coming off of movies like Fight Club and, you know, Django Unchained and things like that. You're going to see kind of the echo of this film.
Absolutely. It's a different time. And like we had said, Escape from New York, right? How what influenced Nick Castle and John Carpenter when writing that script was a product of that time. And then when you revisit it for LA, it doesn't work because the time isn't the same. It's not the same set of circumstances. I think when this movie was made, they had a very keen idea of what they were doing, and it worked. And then the times weren't ready for it. But now we've moved on, and society has changed, and things have shifted. And now this is kind of landing where it was intended to always land. So sometimes it's just the right place and the right time. And this movie was ahead of its time.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, in the cat lady scene, like, he murders her with a giant ceramic dildo. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And just the absurdity of it. And even the room in which she is exercising. I mean, if you've freeze framed that and look at the paintings on the wall, who is this lady and why does she have all these cats and what is going on in this room? And so yeah, it's like the pinnacle of the absurdity of the story, but also of the environment in which they're living and existing. It's like, okay, here's a lady, a middle-aged lady living on her own with all of these cats, but she's surrounded by this, you know, fantastic graphic art, and that's a part of the society that they are in. Like, Alex is not so far removed by his actions from this society that he's in, because here's this lady who's surrounding herself with this graphic artwork. He is a product of this society, of this environment. And just because she's a older person or a more mature person does not mean that she is more refined necessarily. And again, even the girls that Alex picks up, like, yeah, they go home with him voluntarily because they want to have a good time. It's part of that broken society. And right all the way up to the government, the system is broken. And I think that's part of one of the main themes of this film. Is it is a dystopian movie and a dystopian setting, like, across the board. It's not just Alex. Alex is just our friend and humble narrator leading us through this desolate landscape.
The art she has, I think when you have a kind of things like that in your home, it's because it's what you like in life. Maybe, I mean, she's the typical cat lady living alone, and maybe she fantasizes about something she can't have anymore, or she never had, we never know. And that's interesting that she get killed by that, especially by someone who is trying to find his limits in violence, but also in sexuality. So it's kind of she get killed by someone's trying to find his virility, you know. So yeah, I love this scene. I think it's the most funny, is the funniest scene in the movie. But it's also it shows a lot about this lady and this character.
I love the performance is so insane and over the top, but the author He's so crazy. It's so good. It's so over the top, but it's still it works. Food, all right. He's screaming in his face. It's just so good.
Well, think about how you would feel sitting next to the man that raped and caused the death of your loved
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Like the anger that he is like holding back
Right. Right.
is a floodgate that is just like rattled to his core. I think he's right on point. I don't
Yeah.
think he's
No.
over the
Right.
top. I think from an outside point of view, if you walked into this movie like in the middle, then it's like, what the fuck is wrong with that guy? But you need that opening sequence
Yeah.
of events to really put it into context. And I love how the film bookends. It's that old saying, "What goes around comes
Mhm.
around." And you reap what you sow. And so the story starts off with the events of that evening that ends at the house with the rape. And then Alex, he's vicious to his friends. He kicks them and knocks them into the water and cuts them, and then they try to drown him in
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
water. It's like it's what goes around comes around. And it's something that you only really learn from experience and from life, which he does not yet have in his youth, in his blind, arrogant youth, that he's like, oh, I'm untouchable and I can do whatever I want. And,
Yeah.
let's go do this and that and this and that because we want to. And it doesn't matter. And there are no consequences. Woohoo. And then the consequences start adding up, and everything that he has done comes back around to confront him, to the point where he does try to kill himself because he realizes, and it's maybe not even so much that he realizes what a horrible person he was, that's probably rattling around in his fractured brain
Mhm.
somewhere. It's like, shit, everything I love has hurt me, right down to Beethoven.
I mean, I remember when I had first seen it, and I felt bad about having the reaction, but when Alex is in the tub and he's finally calm and relaxing, and he starts to hum "Singing in the Rain," I'm like, "Don't do that. He's gonna hear you." You felt like shit. You're gonna give yourself up, and like, why am I having that feeling? The he's a fucking murderer, But you have that like shit. Don't do that, and then he does it, and then like the guy like has that extreme reaction, and like I also felt for him when Beethoven's ruined for him. It's like the actual one thing, the one decent thing he cared about in the world was ruined for him. And I was like, oh, that kind of sucks, man. Like, so like to have such a despicable character in the beginning, and then for the filmmaker to make you feel all that sympathy, I think is just a testament.
And there are a couple of things going on there, especially with the character of Mr. Alexander, the writer. When Alex is in the tub and he starts singing, Mr. Alexander is on the phone because he wants the reporters to come over because he wants to attack the government for the
Right.
procedures that they're doing. And Alex is the victim of that procedure. Now he's the victim of Mr. Alexander. So he's just exploited 8 ways to Sunday
Right. Right.
because of this. That's part of what builds the sympathy for Alex. I think the real key, though, to unlocking and sympathizing with Alex, even though a lot of his actions, especially early on in the film, are not nice, naughty, let's just say, he it's the narration.
Yeah.
It's that narration that, like, not one-on-one, but the one-on-one with the narrator and the audience, and he even refers to you as friends
Yeah.
when he's talking. He refers to the audience as friends, like, he's talking to you very candidly the way any of your friends would talk to you. If you do take a long car ride with somebody and you, like, are sharing stories, it's like you forgive him because you have this connection, you have this insight into his character. If you were to just watch the actions, it would be one experience. But because you have that narration, you hear him say that he's just looking for fun. He's just out having a good time. They're just
Yeah.
like, that's what he and his friends do. It's that association through the language and through the character's perspective that I think quells the response that you would have as an audience, because it's like, oh, like I understand that, and he's talking to me, so I get that. Like, it subsides it a little bit, even though, and we don't, like, yes, we see him attack the bum. We see him beat the bum up. We see him fight Billy and his friends. And we see him, the rape is very much implied, but we don't actually see it. And I think that's the line where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, if we saw him like smack that woman as he was penetrating her and just, putting a train on her, like, and her crying, it would be a very different experience for the audience
Yeah.
moving forward from that point. Cutting it where they did and then just leaving it implied. Because again, you don't know that she dies until the end, but by that point, Alex has been with us for almost 2 hours, and we've seen what he's gone through, and we've seen the sacrifices that he's made, and we've seen the manipulation that he's fallen victim to by the authority, by those in charge. And we've seen the sacrifice of his free will.
We were talking earlier about violence working through it and having it be therapeutic in some senses, or living vicariously through it. But I mean, the author of this book, his wife was a victim of rape, and so this movie, the book rather, was the response to that. So I think he took a really nasty situation in his own personal life, and he probably had a lot of therapeutic moments by doing this story to get it out of his system. So people say, there's all this violence in this book, but it came from violence.
Writing can be a therapy in a way, and that's what I said earlier. Sometimes you want to kill your manager, but you won't do it in real life. So maybe just writing it down, create something with this frustration. It's hard, So yeah, that's the main point of it.
Another one of those happy accidents that we talk about in filmmaking and using what you have is just him starting to Singing in the Rain.
That's the juxtaposition of like, okay, yeah, you have Singing in the Rain, this happy-go-lucky song, coupled with this extreme violence towards a couple, not only in the beatings but also the rape and the home invasion. And it's that juxtaposition, just like we were talking about earlier with the violence in holiday films. It heightens it in a way that it would not have been taken to otherwise.
And I don't know that I've seen that.
It's a very fine line that you have to walk when doing that, because you can go to an extreme where it becomes almost like obvious or like cartoonish or buffoonish. It's such a fine line between the execution of something like that, where it's not lampooning the events, but it's just taking it into this like much darker place.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever seen that before A Clockwork, because you've seen it obviously many times after, the playing of a sweet old 50s type song, and then there's a murder taking place, and it gives it that that weird spin. So I feel like this is maybe another one of those things where I can't really remember an instance before A Clockwork that something like that was implemented.
And about Malcolm McDowell, I don't know if you know that. I read that somewhere. That actually was casted for this movie because of his performance in a previous movie called If that came out in 1968. Yeah, because some people say that it's kind of a prequel of Clockwork Orange, because it's kids in a kind of a boarding school, and they rebel against the authority of the school. And it could explain, some people say it could explain the attitude of Alex in Clockwork Orange, but obviously not, because it's from a book. So it's two different work, But it's interesting to think that he has been casted for Clockwork Orange after this performance.
Yeah, it's definitely a thematic relative or a thematic cousin to Clockwork Orange, but they are not connected in any real way outside of the actor. You got to think about Malcolm McDowell. Here is a guy, he's a really good actor. Like anything you see him in, whether it's good or not, he's good. Like he is a solid performer. He has great presentation. He has a lot of range, but he does If, which leads to Clockwork Orange, which leads to a movie called Caligula. And he kind of gets typecast as this sort of like disjointed, barbaric madman of cinema. And Caligula was like totally taken out of context for him and didn't exactly help his career, but they were exploiting the fact of his association with Clockwork Orange. But I don't think he's necessarily regretful, especially with regards to his experience with the Clockwork Orange. It's kind of like Anthony Perkins in Psycho. It's like, well, he got to be Norman Bates in Psycho, so nobody can take that away from him, and he gets to live forever in that frame as that character.
For a long time, he resented A Clockwork Orange because he's been in over 100 films, and that's all anybody wants to talk about. We said, but now he realizes in the twilight of his career that, man, if you get at least one of those in your career, You're lucky, man. That doesn't happen every day to get something that big. So he said he's happy to be associated with, Clockwork Orange, and he said he's very grateful and very lucky that Kubrick just chose him. He didn't have to audition, just picked him to do it.
One of the things that stuck out to me when I first saw this film was Malcolm McDowell, because I had actually known him from another movie before this. In 1995, there was a movie that came out called Tank Girl with Lori Petty and Naomi Watts and Ice-T and Malcolm McDowell. So I knew him from Tank Girl as the bad guy. And so when I saw Clockwork Orange, I was like, oh shit, it's the bad guy from Tank Girl, but he's like so young. Whoa! That was 12-year-old me reacting to discovering this movie. Tank Girl is definitely not one that has held up for me the way Clockwork Orange has, but I'm thankful to Tank Girl for kind of opening that Malcolm McDowell recognition door.
Yeah. I haven't seen Tank Girl, but Clockwork is so good that it makes me forgive him for his Sam Loomis in the Rob Zombie Halloweens. I mean, McDowell's great. I don't like what they do with the character at all.
When that movie came out, I was actually really excited for it, and
As was I.
then I went to go see it opening day, and I damn near walked out a few times. I was pissed.
Yeah.
Sitting in the theater watching that movie, Halloween 2007 from Rob Zombie. I was pissed.
Yeah.
But I love Malcolm McDowell.
Yeah.
And like when I saw his casting as Sam Loomis, I was like, oh,
that's gonna be awesome.
That's
right?
great.
I thought the same thing.
And then what they do?
Took a shit on it.
They put Rob Zombie in charge, and that was it. That was the end.
They took a shit on it. And Sam Loomis, for the record, is one of my all-time favorite characters in cinema. Not just horror movies, but in cinema. I love that character. I love Donald Pleasance for it. And I was so psyched out of my mind when I heard Malcolm McDowell. I was like, you can't do better than that. And then they shit all over it. And I was just like, I'm done with this.
Yeah, well, and with regard to the violence, Anne had mentioned that she doesn't consider it to be an ultra-violent film. But again, at the time it was released, it was one of the most violent films, and it was pulled from theaters. It was not available in a lot of markets for about 30 years. And it's kind of a groundbreaking film in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, a contemporary around that same period of time was Straw Dogs with Dustin Hoffman. And, I own that movie. I enjoy that movie, but that movie is nowhere near A Clockwork Orange. I mean, it's good.
I saw that movie once because it wasn't that engaging.
Yeah.
And like Dustin Hoffman, he was great and the story was interesting, but it didn't have the legs that Clockwork Orange has, where you can revisit it and you can mine it for different things, whether you're looking at it from a psychological aspect, from a technical aspect, from a character aspect, from a photographic aspect. There's all these different elements that come together in this film that just make it stand out among the millions of movies that have been made over the last 120 years.
I guess maybe this is a good way to look at it, right? So nobody has ever tried to remake A Clockwork Orange, but there is a remake of Straw Dogs.
All right, well, on that note, I think that about does it here for us today at the Visually Hidden Podcast. So again, we've got VHS selections coming up, so be sure to check those out and tune into the podcast for our discussion. You can always check in on our Instagram for the Tuesday Tease. You can catch Stephen Bendler over at Steve's Pop Culture Corner on Instagram. He's always posting cool things, so be sure to check those out. Anne and I, of course, are on Instagram and Letterboxd, so you can see what we've been watching over there and what we think. And until next week, biddy well.